Hello. So I said I wanted to make a guide on Prepatch Ellie since I've been playing it a lot, and finally found the time to do so. First thing first, this guide is not like most guides would be, where it's based on like sims and math and things like that. This being pre-patch, sims are kind of scuffed. Most people aren't really bothering with the kind of math kind of things. This is based on my experience, my intuition, things like that. So if you feel something else is better and you've like tested it and you genuinely feel that way, then like obviously it is a possibility that it is. But I've been very successful with what I'm going to teach you here. So if you want a nice little baseline to try out yourself, that is what this is supposed to give you. First thing first, I started running this build in dungeons, the full single target oriented build with the legendary wind speakers and Night Fate Covenant with Dreamweaver. I had a lot more success doing this than I did playing an AoE oriented build, because the AoE is actually very good still, and the single target is very competitive as well, whereas an AoE build does good AoE, but does pretty poor single target. My overall ended up being much higher with this. As far as conduits go, Call the Flame, Essential Extraction, and either Shake the Foundations or High Voltage. I think that kind of just depends on the dungeon, maybe the affixes. And then you can also play Karain, where I suspect you want to play Call of Flame and Essential Extraction, and drop High Voltage or Shake the Foundations, since you only get two. I think both these are good options. I've been playing mostly Dreamweaver, but I have been starting to mess with Karain, and I think it's also a really good option too. Also, might be a thing that just kind of depends on how much single target versus how much AoE there is. One downside of Karain is this build has a lot of setup for AoE, so by the time you set up all the way, a lot of the time the crit buff is already gone. So I'm trying to find a way to work around that, but I haven't really figured something out yet. Like I showed you earlier, this is kind of the talent build. Big thing that is different here is you're running Surge of Power. If you didn't know, in Dragonflight, Surge of Power can proc from Earthquake and Earthshock instead of just Earthshock, and that actually can benefit Chain Lightning as well. It makes your Chain Lightning hit 6 targets instead of 5. On AoE dungeons, this is actually super good, especially when you have Stormkeeper up and a bunch of lightning rods out. This does a ton of damage. And then Surge of Power is just way better than Aftershock on single target because of the lightning bolt damage. So you're making a very minor sacrifice, if any, for the AoE to get a lot of single target. That is why I'm running Surge of Power here. There is one alternative build that I've been kind of working on, where instead of running Wind Speaker's Lava Resurgence, I play this. I drop the 2 Echo Chambers, and I go from Master of the Elements down into Primal Elementalist, and I play Skybreaker's Legendary. The idea behind that build is to spread Flame Shocks with your Surge of Power if you're under 5 targets, and get pretty much 100% uptime on Stormily between that and Night Fae with Unity Legendary on. I've had a lot of success with this build too, but I haven't really been able to figure out if the one is like strictly better in any situation. Mythic Plus can be so volatile with overall damage that it takes a lot of testing to really determine that kind of thing, but I've done 35 to 40k overall with both of them, so I think they're both very good options. Maybe it could be like a preference thing, a dungeon thing, but definitely something else I would recommend trying if you like that playstyle. Basically, if you're at what I've been doing is between 2 and 4 targets, I use the SOP proc from Earthquakes to just spread a Flame Shock and keep up 4 of them at a time, or however many you have, and that gets your Stormily back up pretty fast. On Mass AoE, it's probably not worth spreading the Flame Shock. Like on 5 or 6 targets, you probably just keep using Chain Lightning. This does so much more damage. The class tree matters a lot less. Shaman is not one of the classes with a lot of damage in the class tree. This is kind of just something I picked as like a default. You can change some things like drop Thunder Storm when it's not Sanguine and pick up Decurse, pick up Root Totem if you want. There's a lot of things you can take. The big thing I would recommend taking no matter what is Improved Lightning Bolt and Fire and Ice. They both increase your damage. This one by 3% for your Frost Shocks and stuff. This one by 20% on Lightning Bolt. That is actually a lot. So this one is basically something you just need. And then I also recommend running Essential Guidance in dungeons because it's super good. You can heal for well over 1 million with one use of this. Before talking about rotational stuff, I wanted to take a quick look and just say that this is also the raid build with Wind Speaker's Lava Resurgence on. That is the single target build. It is exactly the same thing as what I was running in most of my dungeons. I recommend the exact same talent, same legendary, same covenants. The only thing is I would definitely run a high voltage there and not shake the foundations. High voltage is very good on single target. I'm actually going to switch that right now so I can show you some stuff later. So rotationally, this spec is probably a little overwhelming at first, but once you figure it out, it's pretty scripted. There's not a whole lot that changes. So I think once you get the hang of it, you'll have a pretty easy time doing it. So first, let's look at the single target rotation with Wind Speakers on. The opener, you can either precast Stormkeeper or you can save it for when you have enough Maelstrom. I personally save it. I usually precast Ice Fury, Stormily, Lava Burst into Flame Shock. Use that Mastery Elements on Fey Transfusion, Frost Shock, Stormkeeper, Earth Shock, and then continue on. You want to make sure that you Earth Shock before every Stormkeeper charge. You want to try to keep up your Electrified Shock debuff as much as you can, so like kind of stagger them a little bit. Once you get going, after the opener, your rotation will be like pretty much scripted. I'll show you here in a second when I get enough Maelstrom. Full Maelstrom. Your rotation pretty much goes like this. Keep Flame Shock up, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt after Earth Shock, Lava Surge after Lightning Bolt, Frost Shock after Lava Surge, Earth Shock again, repeat. If you have enough haste, you can skip the Frost Shock every other one, and you should be able to keep it up. But I tend to just do it back to back, so I don't want to lose it. I think you're almost lost it by doing that. But it literally is scripted. You do the same thing over and over again. You use all deterministic. The only thing that isn't quite scripted is the use of Ice Fury. The Ice Fury cooldown itself, but even that's like, you just use it on cooldown. I just Nature Switch to Lightning Bolt and kind of do that on cooldown too. Or you can save it for movement, both is fine. But you keep repeating this: Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt, Lava Surge, Frost Shock, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt, Lava Surge, Frost Shock. It really is that for the entire fight. This is why a lot of people are complaining about Ellie right now, is that once you got it down, it's a little bit simple, a little repetitive. AoE is a little different. I only have 3 target dummies here, but it kind of it's almost kind of similar, where you want to keep up Electrified Shocks. If you have more than 5 targets, you want to use Surge of Power and Earthquake, or not an Earthquake, on Chain Lightning every time. If you have less than that, it doesn't really matter. If you only have 2 targets, you want to use Surge of Power on Lightning Bolt. So I'm fighting these guys. Surge of Power, Flame Shock to get the 2 Flame Shocked up. It's actually worth the investment there too. But once you get enough Maelstrom, you want to Chain Lightning when you don't have Surge of Power up. When you do have Surge of Power up, you want a Lightning Bolt. It can be a little confusing. I think 2 targets is probably the hardest part of this build, because you change your rotation a lot depending on different buffs and uptimes and stuff. Mass AoE is really simple. Just for the sake of showing it here, let's pretend this is 6 targets. You do everything like you used to do, except for you're keeping Electrified Shocks up too. Use Chain Lightning, Earthquake, Electrified Shocks, Earthquake, Chain Lightning, Electrified Shocks. You'd have enough Maelstrom to pretty much repeat this over and over again, because Surge of Power making it at 6 targets gives you more Maelstrom. So it's Earthquake, Chain Lightning, Electrified Shocks. You can also try to fit 2 of those between. A little easier here because you're using 1 less spell than on a single target. I can fit 2 there. Frost Shock again. You can pretty much fit 2 rotations of that in between every Electrified Shocks application. Now for setting up on 6 targets, the setup I was talking about earlier, you want to get as much Maelstrom as you can before you use Stormkeeper. Since I don't have anywhere to go with 6 dummies, I'm just going to try to use clips to kind of show what I'm trying to describe here. But I think the technically optimal way to open on AoE is something that I actually don't think I have a clip of me doing, so be a little off in the background clips. But I believe you want to get to 150 Maelstrom. You want to use Fey Transfusion for the crit buff if you can. Then you're going to want to cast Stormkeeper, press Earthquake 2 times, press Frost Shock with Electrified Shocks to apply the debuff, press Earthquake the 3rd time, and then use the Stormkeeper charge, Earthquake 2 more times, and then use Stormkeeper again. The reason for this is the first 2 Earthquakes apply Lightning Rods to 2 different targets and dump some Maelstrom. The Frost Shock at the end does consume Surge of Power, but it doesn't actually matter. It applies your Electrified Shocks, and then you're going to Earthquake again to apply another Lightning Rod and another Surge of Power. Chain Lightning after that consumes a Surge of Power, hits 6 targets, gives you a ton of Maelstrom, enough to use 2 more Earthquakes, and then you do that again. You'll have like 5 Lightning Rods up and Electrified Shocks up. I spent a while trying to figure out the proper way to open. I think that is it. If the pack won't last for long or has a bunch of mobs that are going to die early, you might want to skip the Electrified Shocks and just go for a triple Earthquake into Stormkeeper. That is what I used to do, and it definitely does well too. Another small note, if you're running the Shake the Foundations conduit, this proc will consume Surge of Power. However, it'll also consume Stormkeeper. So if you want it to run this and you're doing your setup, you probably want to wait to cast Stormkeeper until after the first 2 Earthquakes, so it doesn't waste it and waste a bunch of Maelstrom by proccing it. So you'd want to do the setup I just told you, where you Ice Fury, Earthquake twice, Electrified Shocks, or rather Frost Shock in that case, then Stormkeeper, and then Earthquake again. You might lose some uptime on lightning rods here, but if it procs early, you're wasting so much maelstrom that would be probably a loss, a much bigger loss. But again, that is not a mathematically supported opinion. That is just my intuition speaking. So if you disagree, just do whatever feels right to you. Prepatch is very much a play the game with vibes instead of with math type of patch. As far as stats go, the brutally honest answer here is that I don't have a clue. However, with the big damage shift out of spenders and into generators, I do suspect that mastery is going to be a bit better than it used to be. However, keep in mind that for both single target and for AoE, your big burst windows are with Stormkeeper, which mastery won't benefit at all. So if you're looking for burst in dungeons and stuff, I'd probably still run crit and probably haste. If you're running the Skybreaker build, I think haste gains some value there as well. If you're running single target, mastery might be decent for raid fights, in which case I kind of suspect every stat is good. So it honestly probably is just eye level over everything else. Personally, I could not be asked trying to change my stats around. I've just been running what I ran before, which is high haste. I might need to change some things around to get more crit, more mastery if I really wanted to min-max, but I haven't really bothered messing with my stats a whole lot. But I know a lot of you guys are wondering about stats, so I just wanted to say what I believe, I guess. Also, one more thing, in case I didn't mention it, without Skybreakers on pools that are like 3 or 4 targets, it's going to feel weird because you're wasting Surge of Power, but just do it anyway. You might Frost Shock a Surge of Power, you might Chain Lightning a Surge of Power, just do your rotation as if it didn't exist. It's not worth trying to use a Lightning Bolt or something to make sure you consume the buff. The Chain Lightning will do more damage. On 3 targets that the mobs will live very long, the Flame Shock I think does a little more damage, but it's only if they're going to last the whole duration of it. Otherwise, on 4 targets, 5 targets, without Skybreakers, just hit Chain Lightning again, or spread your Electrified Shocks or whatever you have up at that time. Ignore the Surge of Power entirely. I think that covers everything I wanted to say. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you out. Hopefully you're having fun this patch in Keys. I think Ellie is a very underrated spec right now. A lot of people seem to think it's doing tank damage and stuff, but I have been doing pretty good with it. No complaints here. For pre-patch anyway. Maybe use a little more damage on beta, but that's a discussion for a different video. Thanks again for watching. Like if you liked it, subscribe for more, and I will catch you later. Peace.